Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji Traditions video. In the year 2023 is now upon us, and this will be the first video of the year. Unfortunately, it needs to be a correction video. So this video is meant to serve as a correction to a statement that was made in a previous video. So previously, I had stated that in the Kusunoki Shinobi no Maki, that it mentioned a fisherman disguise for a shinobi. And this made sense because in the Jingunden there is the tradition of fishermen spies, and there's also a tradition in Kusunoki of spies, shinobi, disguised as fishermen. So when I was reading through this, it seemed to make sense at the time. However, upon further analysis of multiple copies of the document, I realized that it doesn't actually say fishermen. So this is a simple and a complex mistake. So I'll explain it. Let's go over it in these following panels. Okay, so let's jump straight into the mistake. And I'm going to use the word cripple. I know it's not politically correct, but that's the flavor of the word in the text. So the document actually says cripple. Where I thought it said fisherman, it actually says cripple now. That might seem like a very easy mistake, but let me explain. And by cripple, I mean someone with a physical impairment. So somebody who's physically impaired. The text uses the kana for isari. Now, isari refers to fishing, fishermen, things like that. There's lots of words that you can create that are involved with fishing and fishermen that use isari. So, and the document itself says isari, but just a slight change from isari to izari. So just voicing that middle sound, isari to izari. That one little change, right? That turns the word from meaning related to fishing, fishermen, fishing line, things of fishing, to physically impaired or crippled. That one little sound change can make that difference. And the term's not written in kanji, it's written in kana. And like I said, the document actually does say isari. However, looking at different copies of the document and comparing the document against itself, looking at the author's own voice and style, the commentator's voice and style, it became clear that it was actually supposed to be izari. And let's go into that. So on the screen, you can see where sa and za. So this is sa and this is za. And the only difference is there's two little slashes in the upper right. And those two little slashes are known as dakuten. And they make the difference between voiced and unvoiced. And those two little slashes is what make you say za instead of sa. Now, the dakuten should be in the document, but it's not. The text, the document actually does just use sa. However, we can see two important features within the document that suggest that it should be za. And yes, these simple differences make an entirely different word. So just the subtle difference of za other than sa makes it a different word. But beyond that, we have two different factors. So let's look at those factors. The first factor. The first key factor is that other copies, there's another copy of the text which actually has the kanji for cripple written next to the kana. So where it originally says isari, to the right of isari, to the right of the kana, someone has written the kanji for cripple, right? Now, this doesn't 100% mean that it's supposed to be that. However, it means that subsequent over the years, somebody reading and studying the text says, oh, it's supposed to have the word cripple here. Again, it's not 100% verification, but it is a good indicator that somebody who's been looking at the text thinks that it should be read that way. So in keeping with that, again, that's not definitive because anybody can just say that it's supposed to mean that and write that in. So it's not definitive. But in keeping with that, we are relying on the commentary. So remember, this document, there's different versions of it, and one version is just the names it's like just a listing of technique names with no additional information. It's just a listing. And then different copies have different amount of commentary added to it. So if we're going just by the list, there's hardly anything to work with. But we are, in this particular case, we are looking at the commentary. So we do take the commentary seriously. In keeping with the different commentary, sometimes the commentary can conflict. Different versions may have different commentary. They may conflict, but in this particular case, nothing's conflicting. So there's no conflicting commentary about that it shouldn't be read izari. Now, I can think of one potential scenario that conflicts, but it's very complicated and it requires several steps to explain it and to happen. Now, I will give you the quick rundown in case in the future, if this actually happens, then we can cite this video. But basically, it centers around the Shin Kusunoki school actually has different, it has documents, and there are different versions of those documents. Some of those documents have very different sections based on the commentary. So, or not based on the commentary, but what I mean is they have very different sections, especially some of the commentary, or more importantly, the introductions. There are some introductions to the text which are very Jingunden, and then that same document, but a different copy, has nothing about the Jingunden in the introduction. So sometimes the introduction or the commentaries can be vastly different. And we do see that within, for example, some of the Shin Kusunoki documents. We know that this Shinobi document gets used by the Shin Kusunoki school. So again, there is a history of there being some very different commentary with their documents. So possibly that may come up in the future. But for the most part, at this point, none of the commentary conflicts. So let's move on to factor 2. So factor 2 is where we run into the more definitive, sort of the one that's the most convincing to me anyway. And that is that there is an entry further on in the document which discusses the ability of blind people and izari and monks and nuns to enter into places without people paying them any attention. And in that entry, it spells cripples as izari. I'm saying izari, but it uses isari. It uses the same misspelling again. So that's twice within the same document where we find a word spelled a certain way. So that it holds. In other words, if that in that entry it is clearly discussing a physically impaired person, and it's using isari so then we know, okay, now this author is misspelling the word. He's saying isari instead of izari, but he's clearly meaning cripple, and that's pretty much bang on. That pretty much puts an end to the discussion. In the original entry, or the entry that looked like it was talking about fishermen, it lists komuso, monks and nuns, and isari, which looked, like I said initially, to be fishermen. But with the other commentary from other copies and other notes attached to the other copies, and with the further entry clearly discussing a physically impaired person using isari, then we can say, yeah, it's supposed to be isari. It's supposed to be izari, but they're using isari instead. So that pretty much locks it in place. And both of the entries seem to be connected in their essence. And actually, because this is all the same document, then I started hunting down other entries in the document, and they're all in a similar. They all seem to be interrelated in that they all seem to be related to Hinso no Ho, which, like I said, we find other entries that mention things hiding your face with various types of hats, using raincoats to sort of hide or distort the shape of your body. This all goes back to Kusunoki-ryu's Hinso no Ho, which we discussed in a previous video. It's Kusunoki-ryu's methods of disguise. And that goes straight back to the original Kusunoki Kaden. So that goes right back to the original Kusunoki-ryu, Kusunoki Masashige, Kusunoki Masanari, before the different branches of the school before Taiheikiru and Kusunokiru and Nankiru, before all the different branches in the 1600s, going back to the original Kusunoki family tradition, the Kaden, Hinso no Ho, which discusses disguising yourself as a sick person, as a physically impaired person, as a blind person, things like that, using dressing a certain way, putting on different types of powders and oils and makeups and things like that, etc., etc. So this ties in perfectly with that. So what did initially look like an amazing Jingunden connection, it's actually not. However, it does keep the Hinso no Ho method of Kusunoki-ryu well entrenched in their Shinobi document. So to review, or in summary, in the Jingunden, the original spy was a fisherman deity that served as a scout and a spy for Emperor Jimmu. So according to the Jingunden, this is the origin of spy. This is the first spy, is the fisherman. And so from there, we find a tradition of spies, spies using other disguises, but specifically the role of a fisherman as their disguise, as their cover. And so this would be like Shotoko Jingunden, Tada Genji Jingunden, and we know that the Kusunoki-ryu comes from the Jingunden tradition as well. So we also see in Kusunoki-ryu, we do find teachings mentioning shinobi pretending to be fishermen as part of their mission. So Kusunoki-ryu does have different entries here and there about disguising yourself as fishermen. What we were looking at specifically was in the shinobi document appeared to list fishermen as one of its main disguises. Now again, this document is from the late 1600s. So so in the terms of timing, so it looked like in the late 1600s we had a Kusunoki Shinobi document saying fisherman was still one of the main disguises, and it looked like it was an amazing Jingunden connection that was still very at the forefront. But upon further analysis of multiple copies and using the document against itself, so to see other entries compared to other entries, it appears that the author actually was intending the word cripple or physically impaired person, but was technically misspelling it in a way that actually made it ironically, look like he was talking about fishermen. So he should have used Izari, but he used Isari. And so because of Kusunoki's connection to the Jingunden and the Jingunden having fishermen spies, it looked like Isari, oh, it's about fishermen, fishing things. Oh, it's a fisherman spy. But it was actually supposed to say Izari, which is cripple, which connects it to Kusunoki-ryu's own tradition, its specialty in so many ways, of the Hinso no Ho, or the disguise methods. And so that's what we're actually looking at. We're not looking at a Jingunden. We're not looking at a throwback to the Jingunden. We're looking at the, we're looking at the sort of deep-rooted Hinso no Ho within the Kusunoki tradition, is what we're ultimately looking at. So if anything, the lesson here is that Hinso no Ho disguise methods are just super deep and systematically connected through the everything, especially the shinobi traditions. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief, and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations.